In the great capital of the Galactic Empire, the towering spires of the royal palace gleamed under the light of 1,000 stars. The heart of this vast empire beat here, in the palace's grand hall, where the Empress Celestia ruled with wisdom and strength. But on this day, despite her many victories and the great power she held, there was a shadow over her heart. The Empress stood alone in the massive hall, her fingers gently caressing the arm of her golden throne. She was a woman of unyielding grace, with sharp features and eyes that had seen both peace and war. Her reputation as a ruler was known across the galaxy. She commanded fleets that could take down entire star systems, negotiated peace treaties with alien civilizations, and upheld the Empire's power with an iron fist. But there was one thing she could not control, one thing that had eluded her for years. Her daughter, Princess Lyra, had reached the age when many young women of her status would already be courted by noble families from across the galaxy. The highest leaders would compete for the privilege of marrying the daughter of the Empress, creating political alliances that would secure their futures. But for Princess Lyra, this simple tradition was proving to be impossible. Despite her beauty, intelligence, and strength, there were no suitors willing to marry her. And as the years went by, the Empress began to notice the growing sadness in her daughter's eyes. Lyra was brilliant, capable of leading armies and ruling with a wisdom beyond her years. She had a deep love for her people, and she had always stood by her mother's side, even during the hardest times. Yet no man, prince, or noble had come forward to seek her hand in marriage. The Empress knew why. They feared her power. Lyra's skills were unmatched, and her intellect could outshine even the greatest minds of the Empire. The nobility saw her as a threat, not a prize. They feared her influence, knowing that anyone who married her would hold too much power and be a challenge to their own positions. They feared the idea of a woman, a princess, a leader in her own right, sharing a throne beside them. It was a sad reality, but it was the truth, and the Empress knew that something had to be done. She had given her daughter every opportunity to find happiness. She had arranged meetings, diplomatic gatherings, even matches with princes from other systems. But each time, the suitors either backed away or were too afraid to ask for her hand. With a deep sigh, the Empress stood before the council. The noble families gathered to hear her plea. She had invited them all, hoping that perhaps one among them would finally step forward. She had given them a chance, a hope, that someone might look past her daughter's power and see her for what she truly was, a woman, a person, not a threat. "No one is willing to marry my daughter," the Empress said softly, her voice filled with both sorrow and resolve. Her words echoed through the hall, and for a moment, there was silence. The nobles, standing at attention, did not know how to respond. No one dared to speak. The Empress, their ruler, was known for her sharp tongue and her ability to crush any opposition. Yet now, her words were filled with an unfamiliar weight, a plea from a mother who only wanted happiness for her child. The room was filled with the buzz of whispers, but none of the nobles dared to meet her gaze. They knew the consequences of speaking out. The Empress had no patience for those who made her question her decisions, but even so, none of them had the courage to offer a solution. After all, who would want to marry the daughter of the most powerful woman in the galaxy? Who would risk everything to be a part of her family? The Empress looked around the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who held the future of the Empire in their hands. She saw fear. She saw hesitation. But she did not see a single man who was brave enough to step forward. It was then, in the back of the room, that a figure moved. He was not dressed in the fine robes of the nobility, nor did he carry the aura of power that the other men in the room did. He was an outsider, someone who did not belong among the elite. But there was something in the way he carried himself, something in his eyes, that caught the Empress's attention. The man stepped forward, his boots echoing in the silent hall. His appearance was not remarkable. He was of average height, his clothes simple but functional. His face was rough, weathered by experience, with eyes that held a quiet confidence. He was not someone you would expect to see in a royal court. He was a mercenary, a man from the fringes of society who had built his reputation through strength, intellect, and a willingness to do what others would not. The nobles looked at him with disdain, wondering who this man thought he was. The Empress, however, felt a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he stepped forward when all others had hesitated? He cleared his throat, his voice calm but filled with a quiet strength. "I will marry her," he said simply. The room was thrown into a stunned silence. The nobles stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or be offended by such an audacious statement. No one had expected this man to speak. He was not a prince or a noble. He was just a man, a mercenary, standing before them as if he had the right to claim the princess's hand. The Empress's gaze softened as she regarded the man. She had not expected this. His words, though simple, were spoken with a confidence that could not be ignored. The people in the room began to murmur, some in disbelief, others in curiosity. They did not understand why this man would volunteer to marry the princess, but the Empress felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Callum, the man who had spoken, knew the risks. He understood the danger of standing before the Empress, of offering himself as a suitor when everyone else had backed away. But there was something about Princess Lyra that intrigued him, something that drew him to her. It wasn't just her beauty or her royal status. It was the way she carried herself, the way she held her head high despite the obstacles in her path. She was more than just a princess. She was a leader in her own right, someone who could change the course of the galaxy if given the chance. Callum had never been one to fear power. He had lived his life as a mercenary, facing battles and dangers that most people could not even imagine. He had seen what the galaxy had to offer, both the good and the bad, and he knew that if he was to live a life of purpose, it would not be by hiding from challenges, but by embracing them. When the Empress turned her gaze upon him, he met her eyes without hesitation. There was no fear in him, only a quiet resolve. "I'll marry her," he repeated, his voice firm and unwavering. "I am not afraid of her power. I'm not afraid of what she can do. I respect her, and I believe I can stand beside her, not as a prince or noble, but as a man who understands what it means to fight for what you believe in." The room was still. The Empress studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes calculating. She had heard of this man, Callum, a mercenary with a reputation for doing the impossible. His feats were the stuff of legend, and though he was not of noble blood, there was something about him that intrigued her. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "You will have your chance," she said, her voice colder now, but still filled with authority. "But know this, marrying my daughter is not a simple thing. It is not just about love or power. You will be tested. If you are to be a part of this family, you will prove yourself worthy." Callum did not flinch. "I understand," he said simply. And so, in that moment, the challenge was set. Callum had stepped forward, and the future of the Empire would change in ways no one could have anticipated. The announcement in the Great Hall had stunned everyone. Callum, the mysterious man from the fringes of society, had dared to step forward and offer himself as a suitor for Princess Lyra. The nobles, still recovering from the shock, exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting between the Empress and the stranger who had just thrown their carefully crafted plans into disarray. Callum stood tall, unwavering, as the nobles whispered behind him. He was not a prince, not a nobleman of any sort, but there was something undeniable about him, a strength in his posture, a calm confidence in his demeanor that demanded attention. His rugged appearance set him apart from the polished, well-dressed men in the room, yet his presence seemed to fill the space more than any of them. Empress Celestia watched him carefully, her sharp, calculating eyes studying his every movement. She had seen men with power, men with titles, men who had great influence. But Callum was different. He wasn't seeking anything from her, other than the chance to prove himself. and that intrigued her. In all her years as ruler, she had never encountered someone like him. "I do not know who you are," the Empress said at last, her voice steady but holding an edge of curiosity. "But your boldness has not gone unnoticed. However, I warn you that marrying my daughter is not an act of simple courage. It requires more than strength or ambition. It requires a mind capable of handling the challenges this empire throws at you." Callum nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know," he replied simply, "and I am ready for whatever challenges come my way. I have faced many dangers in my life, and I do not fear the unknown." The room fell into a deep silence as the Empress continued to study him. She had hoped for a noble suitor, a man of royal blood who could match her daughter's intellect and power, but instead, she had found someone who defied expectations. She had always believed that only those born of noble blood could understand the intricacies of ruling an empire. But Callum had shown her that there was more to leadership than birthright. Her thoughts were interrupted when she turned to face her daughter. Princess Lyra had been watching from her seat, her face a mask of emotion. Lyra was no stranger to politics, to the expectations placed on her as the daughter of the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. She had been groomed for leadership her entire life, and she understood the value of an alliance. But she had never felt the stirrings of love for any of the suitors who had come her way. They were all the same, power-hungry, calculating, and afraid of her strength. None of them had ever seen her as anything more than a political prize. Lyra had spent so much time focused on her duties, on the weight of her future as Empress, that she had almost forgotten what it meant to simply be a person, to be loved for who she was, not what she could offer. And yet, here was a man who, though he had no title and no royal blood, had dared to see her as more than just the daughter of an empress. As she looked at Callum, she felt something stir inside her. Was it respect? Or perhaps something deeper? Something that had been buried beneath years of political games and power struggles. She couldn't say for sure, but she knew one thing. Callum was not like the others. There was no fear in him, only quiet confidence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Empress spoke again, breaking the silence.
"You will be tested," she said, her voice firm.
"If you wish to marry my daughter, you must prove yourself worthy. You will face trials, each designed to test your strength, your intellect, and your ability to command respect. Fail any of these trials, and you will not be considered." Callum met her gaze without hesitation. "I understand."
"I will prove my worth, whatever it takes." With a nod from the Empress, the court dissolved into murmurs.
The nobles were still in shock, unsure how to process what had just occurred. The idea of a mere mercenary marrying the princess of the empire was a concept so foreign to them that it was difficult to fathom. But there was something about Callum, something that made them uneasy, and it was clear that this wasn't just some foolish gesture. This man was determined, and that was enough to make him dangerous in their eyes. Princess Lyra, too, remained silent. She had never been one to openly express her emotions, but she was not blind to the implications of Callum's decision. She had heard the whispers of his name, stories of his exploits, and his uncanny ability to survive in the most dangerous of situations. He was a man who had earned respect, even if it was among mercenaries and outcasts. The next few days were filled with preparations. Callum was given a brief period to gather supplies and ready himself for the first of the Empress's trials. The palace became a flurry of activity as the royal guards made arrangements for the challenges that lay ahead. The Empress and Princess Lyra watched from their chambers as the preparations continued, their minds focused on the coming days. Lyra had never been a stranger to competition. Her mother had taught her from a young age that to rule the galaxy, one had to be more than just capable. They had to be unmatched. But now, as she prepared for the trials to begin, she found herself conflicted. The thought of watching Callum face these challenges left her with a sense of unease. She didn't want to see him fail, but she knew that failure was inevitable for anyone who couldn't rise to the occasion. But in her heart, there was something else. A spark of hope, perhaps. Could this man, this stranger, really be the one who could stand beside her, not as a symbol of power, but as an equal? On the morning of the first trial, Callum stood at the gates of the palace, his heart beating with both excitement and anxiety. He knew that this would be the beginning of everything. If he failed, he would leave with nothing. But if he succeeded, the life he had always dreamed of, a life of purpose, of meaning, and perhaps even love, was within his reach. The first trial would take place on the barren planet of Zeta 9, a desolate world located at the edge of the galaxy. It was a place of untold danger where only the bravest or most foolish ventured. The challenge was simple, or so it seemed. Retrieve an ancient artifact hidden deep within the planet's labyrinthine cave system. The artifact was said to possess immense power, and it had been lost for centuries. Many had tried to find it, but none had returned. As Callum prepared for the journey, he thought back to the first time he had set foot on a dangerous world like Zeta 9. He had been younger then, full of ambition and fear, eager to prove himself. But now, with the weight of the Empress's challenge on his shoulders, he understood what was at stake. This was no longer about personal glory. It was about something much bigger than himself. The royal fleet would take him to the planet's surface, and from there he would be on his own. No help, no guidance. Just him, his skills, and the unknown dangers that awaited. He boarded the ship with a sense of resolve. As the engines roared to life and the ship ascended into the starry sky, Callum took a deep breath. He was ready. This was only the beginning. The journey to Zeta 9 was long, and the silence aboard the royal ship felt heavy. Callum stood by the large window, gazing out into the vast expanse of space, the stars twinkling like distant memories. He had spent years traveling the galaxy, but this mission was different. It was no longer about just survival or gold. It was about proving something to the Empress, to Princess Lyra, and perhaps to himself. Zeta 9 was a harsh, barren planet located on the fringe of the galaxy, known only to a few who dared to visit. It was a place where the environment itself seemed hostile, where storms could appear without warning, and dangerous creatures roamed the rocky plains. The caves where the artifact was hidden were said to be labyrinthian, filled with traps and dark corners that even the bravest explorers feared. Yet Callum was undeterred. He had faced dangers before. But this was different. This was a test, one that would determine his future. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, Callum took a deep breath and prepared himself for the challenges ahead. The moment the ship touched down on the rocky ground of Zeta 9, the door opened, revealing the dark landscape that stretched out before him. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and the wind howled like a ghostly whisper. The ground was cracked and dry, a stark contrast to the lush green worlds Callum was used to. The air felt thick, heavy with dust, and the scent of something ancient. The royal fleet had provided Callum with the best equipment, a durable suit designed to withstand the harsh conditions, a map of the cave system, and basic provisions. The artifact he sought was believed to be hidden deep within the heart of the cave system, guarded by both nature and ancient technology. No one knew exactly what kind of dangers awaited, but there were rumors of traps that could turn a person to stone or disintegrate them in an instant. Callum gathered his supplies and stepped out into the harsh wind. As he made his way toward the entrance of the cave, his heart beat a little faster. He was alone now, with no one to rely on but himself. There would be no backup, no guards to protect him. This was his trial. The entrance to the cave was dark, its mouth like a giant gaping wound in the rock. Callum stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. He activated his flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick shadows. The walls of the cave were smooth, yet the air felt alive with a strange energy, as if the place itself was watching him. He moved cautiously, each step echoing through the silence. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that the longer he took to find the artifact, the harder the trial would become. The map he had been given was vague at best, with only rough markings that indicated the possible location of the artifact deep within the cave system. He didn't have much time, and he knew that the longer he stayed in the cave, the greater the risk. As he ventured deeper into the cave, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thinner. Callum's breath came in short bursts as he climbed over jagged rocks and navigated through narrow passages. His muscles ached from the strain, but he pushed on, determined to complete the task before him. The map showed the artifact was located in the center of the cave system, but getting there wouldn't be easy. Hours passed, and the further he went, the more the cave seemed to twist and shift, almost as if it were alive. He had learned long ago that the best way to survive in dangerous situations was to remain calm and think ahead, but even Callum could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in on him. He checked his compass to ensure he was still on the right path, but the further he ventured, the more he felt disoriented. It was as if the cave itself was trying to confuse him, to trap him inside. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted. Callum barely had time to react as a series of loud grinding noises filled the air. The walls of the cave trembled, and then, with a deep rumble, a section of the floor collapsed beneath him. He fell through the air, his body twisting in an instinctive attempt to regain balance. But there was no time to recover. He hit the ground hard, landing with a painful thud that knocked the wind out of him. The world around him spun for a moment, but he forced himself to focus. Groaning, he stood up and checked his body. Fortunately, the fall had not broken any bones, though his ribs were sore. He quickly checked his surroundings. He was now in a large underground chamber, the floor cracked and uneven, and the walls were lined with strange markings that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. The ceiling was high, and the air felt thick with an ancient energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was no time to waste. Callum pushed forward, his mind focused on the task at hand. As he walked deeper into the chamber, he noticed something strange. A series of symbols etched into the walls, some of them glowing faintly. He had seen similar markings in ancient texts, but he wasn't sure what they meant. Could these symbols be related to the artifact? Could they be part of the trial? He stepped closer to the wall, inspecting the symbols more closely. They seemed to be a mix of ancient languages, many of which he didn't recognize. But one thing was clear. The artifact was near. The symbols were not random. They were a guide, pointing him in the right direction. Callum continued his journey, using the symbols as a map of sorts. But as he moved forward, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air grew colder, and the strange energy he had felt before intensified. He felt a tingling sensation on his skin, a warning, but he ignored it. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to tremble once again. Callum had no time to react as the floor split open in front of him, revealing a pit of swirling shadows. The pit seemed to draw everything around it, as if it were alive, hungry for anything that came too close. Callum quickly jumped back, narrowly avoiding being swallowed by the abyss. He cursed under his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no ordinary trial. The cave was designed to test his every move, to push him to his limits. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. But Callum was determined. He had faced worse dangers in his life, and he would not let this cave defeat him. With renewed determination, he continued his journey, following the glowing symbols and avoiding the traps that seemed to appear at every turn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Callum reached the heart of the cave. Before him lay a large, ornate pedestal, and atop it rested the artifact. It was an ancient relic, its surface covered in intricate designs that seemed to shift and change with every glance. The energy surrounding the artifact was palpable, and Callum could feel its power coursing through the air. He stepped forward cautiously, his hand hovering over the artifact. This was it. He had completed the trial, but now he had to claim the prize. But as his fingers brushed against the surface of the artifact, the ground beneath him began to shake violently. The cave was collapsing around him, the walls crumbling and falling into the abyss. Callum's heart raced as he grabbed the artifact, feeling its power surge through him. But there was no time to admire his success. The cave was falling apart, and he had to escape. With the artifact in hand, he sprinted toward the exit, the walls crashing down behind him. The cave was a death trap now, and if he didn't move quickly, he would be trapped forever. The air was thick with dust and debris as he ran, dodging falling rocks and trying to find the safest path. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he pushed forward, the image of Princess Lyra and the Empress flashing in his mind. He couldn't fail now. Just as he reached the entrance, a massive boulder crashed down in front of him, blocking the way. Callum gritted his teeth, his mind racing for a solution. Without thinking, he turned to the side, finding another narrow passage that led upward. He didn't know where it went, but it was his only chance. With a final burst of energy, he climbed toward the surface, his body aching with every step. And when he finally broke through to the surface of Zeta 9, the sunlight felt like a blessing. He had done it. He had survived the trial. But the real test was yet to come. The roar of the wind and the hum of the royal ship's engines filled the air as Callum sat in the cargo hold, staring down at the artifact he had fought so hard to retrieve. It was small, but powerful, glowing with an otherworldly energy. He could feel its weight in his hands, a reminder of the dangerous journey he had just completed. The cave had tried to kill him, but he had survived, and now he held the prize that the Empress had tasked him to find. The ship's course was set for the capital, and though Callum had completed the first trial, he knew that the hardest part was still ahead. He wasn't just carrying a relic. He was carrying the weight of the Empress's expectations, of Princess Lyra's hopes, and of his own desire to prove himself. He had succeeded in the trial, but the real question was whether he could win the heart of the princess. He had never been the type of man to worry about love. He had been a mercenary for most of his life, traveling from planet to planet, taking on dangerous missions, and rarely staying in one place long enough to form connections. He had learned to survive, to keep his emotions in check, and to focus on the task at hand. But Lyra was different. She was not like the women he had known. She was a leader, a ruler in the making, someone who carried the hopes of an entire empire on her shoulders. And despite everything he had seen in his life, despite all the dangers he had faced, there was something about her that called to him. As the ship neared the capital, Callum felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The first trial had been difficult, but it had been just the beginning. Now, he had to face the second trial, something that would test not just his strength, but his ability to connect with the princess, to show her that he was more than just a man from the fringes of society. He would have to win her trust, her respect, and perhaps even her love. The ship landed with a soft thud, and Callum was ushered out into the bustling streets of the capital. The grandeur of the city took his breath away. Towering buildings stretched toward the sky, their shining surfaces reflecting the light of distant stars. The streets were filled with people, from the wealthy elite to commoners from all corners of the galaxy. The sound of bustling activity filled the air, and Callum couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had been to many cities, but none like this. He was led through the palace gates, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He was about to meet Princess Lyra again, and this time, it wouldn't be in a grand hall or a formal setting. This time, it would be different. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that everything had changed. The palace was a maze of corridors and rooms, each more opulent than the last. Callum was taken to a private wing, where he was told to wait. His thoughts wandered as he paced the room. He had come so far, survived so many dangers, but he still didn't know what kind of man he needed to be for Lyra. He had faced physical trials, but this was different. This was about connection, about trust. It wasn't enough to prove himself through strength. He had to show her that he was worthy of her respect, her heart. After what seemed like hours, the door opened, and Princess Lyra entered the room. She was as beautiful as Callum remembered, her presence commanding, her eyes sharp with intelligence. But there was something different in her expression this time. She wasn't the aloof princess he had met before. Now, she was someone he had to face as an equal, as someone who could either see him as a partner or dismiss him as just another suitor. Callum stood, his heart pounding in his chest. "Princess," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You've completed the first trial," she said, her tone cool but with a hint of something else, perhaps curiosity. "The artifact is yours, but the real question remains. Who are you, Callum? You are not the man I expected." Callum felt a pang of uncertainty, but he quickly pushed it aside. "I am who I need to be," he said simply. "A man who has faced many challenges, and one who is ready to face whatever comes next." She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not fully convinced. "And what is it that you want, Callum? Do you seek power? A title? Or are you just here for the challenge?" Callum took a deep breath, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "I'm here because I believe in something greater than myself."
I'm here because I believe in you, Princess. I believe in your vision for the future of this empire.
"And I'm here to stand beside you, not as a prince, not as a nobleman, but as a man who respects you for who you are, not just what you represent." Lyra's eye softened slightly, but she said nothing for a long moment. Instead, she walked toward the large window, looking out over the city. "You think that's enough?" she asked quietly. "Respect alone? Do you think that's all it takes to rule an empire?" Callum stepped forward, his voice earnest. "No. But respect is where everything begins. It's where trust is built. Without respect, there can be no understanding, no unity. I know I'm not the man you expected, but I'm here because I believe in the work you will do, and I believe I can help you do it." Lyra turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Callum wasn't sure if he was making any progress at all. But then, something shifted in her eyes. She didn't smile, but there was a hint of approval there, something he hadn't expected to see. "You have been honest with me," she said, her voice softer now. "That is something I value, but it's not enough to say the right words. It's not enough to have respect. You will need to prove yourself in more ways than one." Callum nodded.
"I understand. I'm ready to prove myself, however you need me to." She studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke.
"There is more to ruling an empire than physical strength, more than being a great warrior. It is about understanding people, their needs, their fears. You'll need to learn how to lead with wisdom, not just power. That is the test I'm offering you now."
Callum frowned slightly, trying to understand.
"What do you mean?"
Lyra walked over to a table, picking up a small device.
I want to know what kind of man you are, Callum. I want to see how you handle a real challenge, not one of strength or skill, but one of leadership. We have a situation. An uprising on a distant colony. People are rebelling, and the situation is growing more dangerous by the day.
You'll need to navigate politics, convince both sides to come to the table, and find a peaceful solution. That is the second trial. Callum's eyes widened. "You want me to negotiate peace between rebels and the Empire?" Lyra nodded. "Yes. You will have to find a way to end the conflict without bloodshed. It will test your leadership, your ability to think on your feet, and your understanding of what it means to rule, not just as a soldier, but as a leader." Callum swallowed hard. He had fought wars, faced enemies in battle. But this was different. This wasn't about victory in combat. This was about finding a way to unite two sides at war, to build trust where there was none. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll find a way to bring peace." Lyra nodded again, her eyes searching his face. "I believe you." But remember, this is not just about solving a problem. It's about showing me, and yourself, that you can be more than a mercenary, more than a warrior. You must show me that you can lead with wisdom and compassion. Callum felt the weight of her words. This was the true test. The first trial had been physical, but this one would test the core of who he was. He had no doubt that he could handle the political maneuvering and the danger that lay ahead. But what concerned him more was the idea of winning Lyra's trust, not just as a leader, but as a partner. As he turned to leave, the weight of the artifact still in his hand, he looked back at her. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Lyra's expression softened just a little. "I hope you don't. I truly do.